The economic, social, and political disparity between Eastern and Western Europe is one of the most significant divisions within the continent. While both regions have shared histories, Eastern Europe has generally lagged behind Western Europe in terms of economic development, infrastructure, political stability, and quality of life. The reasons for this divide are deeply rooted in history, shaped by geopolitical forces, political ideologies, and external interventions. Below is a comprehensive examination of why Eastern Europe is less developed than Western Europe, focusing on historical, political, economic, and social factors. Historical context. The roots of the East-West divide in Europe can be traced back to the Roman Empire's division in 395 AD into the Western Roman Empire and the Eastern Roman or Byzantine Empire. This division created distinct spheres of influence. Western Europe developed under Latin culture, the Catholic Church, and feudalism, while Eastern Europe came under the Byzantine Orthodox tradition. The Western Roman Empire fell in 476 AD, plunging Western Europe into the Dark Ages. But it also led to the Renaissance, industrialization, and the spread of capitalist ideologies. The Byzantine Empire, on the other hand, persisted until 1453, but its fall left Eastern Europe more vulnerable to invasions from the Ottomans and other forces, disrupting its developmental trajectory. Eastern Europe, particularly the Balkans, was significantly affected by the expansion of the Ottoman Empire from the 14th century. Ottoman rule stifled economic development, constrained political autonomy, and imposed a different social structure compared to the feudal systems of Western Europe. Similarly, Mongol invasions in the 13th century devastated parts of Eastern Europe, particularly Russia and Ukraine. These invasions crippled the region's economic structures, destroyed cities, and led to the establishment of authoritarian regimes, which continued to hamper development for centuries. The Enlightenment and Industrial Revolution. While Western Europe was undergoing the Enlightenment in the 17th and 18th centuries, which championed the ideas of individual freedom, democracy, and capitalism, Eastern Europe remained largely agrarian, feudal, and autocratic. The Industrial Revolution, which began in Britain in the late 18th century, transformed Western Europe into a manufacturing powerhouse, promoting urbanization, technological innovation, and economic growth. Eastern Europe, by contrast, remained largely rural, with limited industrialization until the 19th and 20th centuries. The late arrival of industrialization in Eastern Europe limited its ability to develop at the same pace as its Western counterparts. Political factors. Communism and planned economies. One of the most critical reasons for the economic disparity between Eastern and Western Europe is the political divide created after World War II. The Yalta Conference in 1945 solidified the division of Europe into spheres of influence between the United States and the Soviet Union. Western Europe, supported by the US through the Marshall Plan, embraced capitalism and democracy, while Eastern Europe came under Soviet control, adopting communist ideologies and centrally planned economies. Communism severely hindered economic development in Eastern Europe. Unlike Western Europe's capitalist model, which incentivized entrepreneurship, innovation, and market competition, the centrally planned economies of the Eastern Bloc were characterized by inefficiencies, corruption, and lack of innovation. The absence of private property, free markets, and competition stifled growth, leading to economic stagnation and poor living standards. Even though some Eastern European countries, like East Germany and Czechoslovakia, experienced periods of industrial growth, it was unsustainable without market mechanisms. Authoritarianism and lack of political freedom. Communist regimes in Eastern Europe were also characterized by authoritarianism and repression. Political dissent was crushed, freedom of speech was curtailed, and democratic institutions were non-existent. The lack of political pluralism contributed to inefficiency and corruption, as leaders were not held accountable to their citizens. In contrast, Western Europe embraced liberal democracy, allowing for greater political stability, accountability, and more effective governance. This political freedom in the West fostered environments conducive to economic development, trade, and technological advancements. Soviet influence and control. The Soviet Union played a significant role in Eastern Europe's lack of development during the Cold War. Moscow's control over the Eastern Bloc countries restricted their economic and political choices, compelling them to align with Soviet interests. This included trade policies that isolated Eastern Europe from the global economy, focusing instead on trade within the Socialist Bloc through the Council for Mutual Economic Assistance, or Comecon. This isolation limited access to Western technologies, investments, and markets, further stifling economic growth. The Soviet Union also imposed military and bureaucratic costs on Eastern European countries, which diverted resources away from development initiatives. Additionally, the collectivization of agriculture and the forced industrialization in these countries often led to environmental degradation, resource misallocation, and food shortages, further inhibiting growth. Economic factors. Delayed economic reforms. While Western Europe was able to benefit from market-oriented reforms and the Marshall Plan after World War II, Eastern Europe remained economically stagnant under communist rule. The lack of competition, over-reliance on heavy industry, and inefficient allocation of resources were key features of centrally planned economies. It was only after the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991 that Eastern Europe began transitioning towards market economies. This transition, often called shock therapy in some countries, involved rapid privatization, deregulation, and the opening of markets. However, these reforms were disruptive and came at a high social cost, with high unemployment, inflation, and poverty rates in the 1990s. Globalization and integration with the European Union. Western Europe benefited greatly from globalization and economic integration, particularly through the European Economic Community, which later became the European Union. Western European countries were able to form a cohesive trading bloc, benefiting from free trade, the free movement of labor and capital, and collective technological advancements. Eastern Europe, on the other hand, was excluded from this economic integration until the 1990s. Even after the collapse of communism, many Eastern European countries struggled with corruption, weak institutions, and an unstable regulatory environment, which limited foreign direct investment and slowed economic growth. However, the accession of Eastern European countries to the EU in 2004 and 2007 for countries like Poland, Hungary, the Czech Republic, and Romania has provided a significant boost to their economies. EU membership has allowed these countries to access European markets, receive structural funds, and attract more foreign investment. While this has improved economic conditions in some Eastern European nations, the gap with Western Europe remains. Agricultural dependence and industrial lag. For much of its history, Eastern Europe has remained largely agrarian compared to the industrialized West. This reliance on agriculture, especially before the 20th century, contributed to slower economic growth. Even when industrialization began in Eastern Europe, it was often state-controlled, leading to inefficient production and low-quality goods. Moreover, while Western Europe invested heavily in high-tech industries, research and development, and services, Eastern Europe remained focused on low-value manufacturing and heavy industries, which did not promote long-term economic growth. Social and cultural factors have played a crucial role in shaping the economic and developmental trajectories of Europe. Education and human capital have been pivotal in the divergence between Western and Eastern Europe. Historically, Western Europe has seen higher levels of investment in education and the development of human capital compared to its Eastern counterpart. Movements like the Enlightenment, Renaissance, and Reformation spurred significant educational advancements in the West. This fostered a culture of inquiry, innovation, and scientific progress. On the other hand, Eastern Europe, influenced by authoritarian regimes and the Soviet Union, had limited access to quality education and intellectual freedom. Even though literacy rates did improve under communism, the education systems were often ideologically driven. This meant there was less emphasis on critical thinking and innovation, which ultimately stunted the development of human capital. Another significant factor has been the emigration of skilled workers and intellectuals from Eastern Europe to Western Europe. Many talented individuals from Eastern European countries sought better opportunities in the West, particularly after the fall of communism. This brain drain deprived Eastern Europe of much-needed talent and innovation, exacerbating the development gap. Geopolitical and security concerns. Proximity to Russia and instability. Eastern Europe's proximity to Russia has also played a role in its development challenges. Throughout history, countries in Eastern Europe have been caught between Western Europe and Russia, leading to frequent invasions, territorial disputes, and political instability. The influence of Russia, particularly during the Soviet era, constrained Eastern Europe's economic choices and political freedoms. Even after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, many Eastern European countries remain vulnerable to Russian influence and interference, as seen in recent events like the annexation of Crimea and conflicts in Ukraine. Ethnic conflicts and war. The Balkans and other parts of Eastern Europe have experienced significant ethnic conflict and war, particularly in the 20th century. The collapse of Yugoslavia in the 1990s, for instance, led to a series of brutal wars that devastated the region's economies and infrastructures. Such conflicts have further hindered the region's ability to develop and integrate into the global economy, leading to prolonged periods of instability and poverty. Conclusion. The development gap between Eastern and Western Europe is the result of a complex mix of historical, political, economic, social, and geopolitical factors. While Western Europe benefited from early industrialization, capitalist economies, political freedom, and integration into the global economy, Eastern Europe was held back by centuries of Ottoman and Mongol invasions, communist rule, and delayed economic reforms. Although significant progress has been made since the end of the Cold War, and many Eastern European countries have integrated,